I'm sure many of you are familiar with the book by George Orwell, 1984. And I'm sure many of you are also familiar with the famous quote from the book that we've always been at war with Eurasia, Oceania being this nation state. The idea being that initially in the book, Oceania is at war with Eurasia. And the propagandists of the state of Oceania say, no, we've always been at war with Eurasia. This isn't new. And this is a bit of a meme, and it's repeated often, but it speaks to the power of institutions and larger cultural bodies and their ability to fundamentally change history as we know it. Because there's something about history that comes down to perception and interpretation. If you repeat something often enough, you might, in fact, believe it. And there's a lot of deep history that's been lost as well. So our lens of history, especially the further back we go, tends to get quite muddled. And there's this idea that George Orwell implicitly proposes, and that is, he who controls the past controls the present, he who controls the present controls the future. And so you rewrite history and then you turn it into something that it was not, and then given a certain amount of time that goes by, history has now been recalibrated and people believe something different. Now you could probably argue that this has always been the case to some degree, but the question is to what degree? And on top of that, the question is, was it artificially manufactured? Was it driven by intention rather than human error, human fallibility, and other factors? Because I would argue that, broadly speaking, a lot of historical error and misunderstanding is driven by human fallibility, the fact that we're just not perfect. We tend to err in a lot of things. So why am I even talking about this? Well, many of you have probably caught wind of the fact that finally, after many, many years, Warhammer 40k, this universe, this setting, has now been assaulted and irredeemably changed by the destroyers of worlds, as I refer to them. The SJWs, the people that want to infect everything and change everything because A, their ideology demands it, and B, because I honestly think they're just spiteful people that enjoy destroying things for the sake of destroying them. It gives them pleasure. Now, for the record, I'm not a huge fan of Warhammer 40k. I've never played it. I've read a bit of the lore here and there. I know the basics, more or less. And to be even more honest, I'm not really into grimdark. The reason being, well, if I want grimdark, I can just look at life itself. Life is grimdark. I don't need 40k to enhance that. That said, Warhammer 40k has boatloads of fans that have been there for decades, because the game has existed for well over 3 decades, no surprise there. And you could literally never play the game and just read novels and lore books and comics and play video games in this setting, and that would be enough for you for years, if not decades. So there's a lot going on here. What was the big change that took place? Well, there's a faction in this setting called the Custodes, who are the super enhanced, super mutated, super powerful, male-only bodyguards of the God Emperor of mankind. I don't need to go into all the lore here, but for a variety of reasons, they're only male. They're chosen of the firstborn sons of families, and there are genetic and scientific reasons why they cannot be anything other than male. That's been explained in the lore. And another factor here is that a lot of the old technology in Warhammer 40k, relatively speaking, has been lost. So 40k, 40,000 years in the future, is actually in many ways less advanced than, say, 20,000 years into the future. Just a little background here. And what have they done? They have now introduced female Custodes without any attempt to explain the lore behind it. Now, something I should point out, again, not an expert, but I know the basics of 40k lore. There have always been female soldiers in this setting, because you have to understand that 40k is grimdark. It's a depressing universe where life is cheap, so everyone has their use for the sake of being cannon fodder. The famous or infamous catchphrase of 40k being, in the grim darkness of the far future, there's only war. And so you do have female factions in this setting, ones that are actually quite important, all things considered. Probably the most prominent among them being the so-called Adepta Sororitas. One of the reasons I don't like 40k, by the way, it's a pet peeve, is that they use broken, incorrect Latin, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, they're called the Sisterhood, and they serve the Imperium of Man, the God Emperor, in their own capacity, and they're pretty important. And there are many other positions in this universe, in the setting, that don't disallow for females. And this isn't really about the fact that they have now changed the lore to custodies being female as well, but rather the way they went about it. And we're going to go into this in a bit. Because essentially, to get back to my original point, what Games Workshop, the makers of 40K, did is say there have always been female custodies, which is this ironic or not so ironic move, which really makes you think of 1984, where Oceania says, oh, we've always been at war with Eurasia, even though they had not always been at war. And so 30 plus years of established lore, with repeated entries, with repeated mentions, with entire articles about this faction, where no women were involved, where there were no women ever allowed, etc., and all of a sudden they're there. Because it's always been the case. And so they're basically trying to rewrite history within the context of this setting. Now there's some further points I need to elaborate on here. I've come to the conclusion after many years of the so-called culture war that the vast majority of the participants, ideological they might be, probably get a lot more out of spite and the destruction of what they regard as their ideological enemies than anything else. So as they attack and slowly disintegrate entire franchises, you have to ask what their goal is. And their goal is basically a homogenization, which is akin to annihilation of everything. They want everything in this world to uniformly and unilaterally reflect what they think the world should be rather than the way it is. And the main driving force here, in my humble opinion, is the desire to destroy. Yes, they have an ideology. Yes, some of them might actually think this is good. But ultimately, when you try to homogenize everything, from society to government to academic institutions to people to, yes, recreational but intense hobbies and places of escapism, then ultimately you want to destroy everything. You want to turn everything into this giant plastic gray gook blob of nothingness. And so, of course they've done this. That's what they do. They want to destroy history, they want to destroy institutions, and of course they want to destroy what I regard as some of the most important things out there, important beacons of fiction, cultural artifacts that hold meaning to people. And that's also why lore is so integral to any setting, because it's not about saying in this case that 40K is ultra believable. It's not. It's really wacky and weird and funny in some cases. But within the framework of that setting, you need to have consistency. You need to have something that holds it all together, glue, to be able to immerse yourself in it. Obviously, as I say this doesn't just apply to 40K. So you could imagine a situation, which I think we are getting close to, hypothetically, where the Star Wars franchise, another franchise I'm not a huge fan of, but I'm familiar with the basics, Luke Skywalker is featured again, but he's featured as a woman, an actual biological female. And then they say, well, Luke Skywalker has always been a woman. Didn't you know? Despite the evidence to the contrary. And this is what they're doing. They don't care about the source material. And you have to think about source material and lore that has persisted over many years and especially decades as the bedrock, as the molecular foundation of any given setting. If you destroy that, the setting has less and less meaning. It becomes less believable. Not because it's believable in a traditional sense, but within the context of that universe. That's what the destroyers of worlds do. And there is no explanation for 30 plus years of lore referring to the custodians as being exclusively male. They don't need one this time. They're not even trying to retcon anything now, because a retcon would involve some explanation of why something has changed. Instead, they're just saying there are now female custodians, and that's it. How did this come to pass? Well, beyond the general culture war we've all been enmeshed in now for the better part of a decade, this is once again related to big money, BlackRock, and the explosion in popularity of 40K, particularly during the time of the pestilence, when people probably had less to do. All of a sudden, it exploded in popularity, and more people wanted a piece of the pie. And so BlackRock comes in and buys up shares of 40K from Games Workshop, and they say, you guys need to improve your ESG score. That is your environmental, social, and governance scores, which is a set of scores basically for wokeness. How woke are you? How much do you conform and comply with woke requirements? Blah, 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 blah. And lo and behold, almost overnight, they start twisting the established lore into something it's not and pulling in 1984. Again, I can't emphasize this enough. This is driven by a desire, yes, partially ideological. Yes, some of them actually think this might make the world a better place, but ultimately the key driving factor is the desire to destroy, the desire to see things fall apart that they don't like, and they like to see the lamentations of their enemies, so to speak. So this is almost entirely driven by spite, by schadenfreude, by many of the negative and less pleasant human emotions. And in most cases, there's not much you can do. If you notice, for example, when it comes to the gaming world, broadly as a demographic, gamers are not very selective, and so they're not going to vote with their wallets. And the same is true of cinema when you think about all the normies out there. But very specifically, there might be a sliver of a chance when it comes to 40K, because you have no idea how devoted and fanatical many aficionados and enthusiasts of 40K are. They take it very seriously. And I could be wrong here, but I don't think this is akin to an attack on, say, Star Wars or some fairly popular gaming franchise. This is something that goes back many decades. People take it very, very seriously. So the silver lining here, maybe, is that the broad player base doesn't agree with this. They vote with their wallets, and they basically bankrupt Games Workshop. Because this is the problem, gentlemen, at the end of the day. These people, these ESG wokerati folk, whatever you want to call them, however you want to describe them, they are hell-bent on the destruction of anything that's basically nice, good, and interesting in this world. The only way to answer it, I would argue, is to answer in kind. If devotees of 40K really don't like what's going on, they actually do need to conscientiously vote with their wallets and destroy 40K as a whole and end Games Workshop. Will this happen? Well, probably not. I think it's a very slim chance that it could happen, but it's a bigger chance that it could happen than, say, compared to the Star Wars franchise, or a franchise that's exclusively found in the realm of video games. Anyway, I can't say I'm surprised, but as always, thank you for tuning in. Many special thanks to my patrons and donors on PayPal. You guys are the best. You are the beacon against darkness in these dark times. Much appreciated from the heart. And if you can leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe, be much appreciated. Maybe it helps. We'll see. Until the next time, if I'm still alive, I'll check you out then. May the gods watch over you. Fortune to you. Bye-bye for now. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.